Have you seen the headlines that vegetarian diets can reduce your risk of a stroke? I'm Dr. Brett Scherer, the medical director at dietdoctor.com, and I really want to focus on this study here because it is the perfect example of the problems we have with nutritional epidemiology. Now, at Diet Doctor, we talk a lot about the quality of evidence. We want to make sure the strength of our recommendation is matched by quality of evidence. And as we've seen with red meat and processed meats, when you evaluate the evidence from the visual of, is this quality evidence or is it pretty low quality evidence, you can see that the general recommendations of avoiding red meat, avoiding saturated fat don't hold up when you evaluate the quality of evidence. Well, now here's where we're confronted with something very similar, and this is such a perfect example of this. So the study published in the Journal of Neurology, which we just posted about on dietdoctor.com, it looked at volunteers of the Shu Shi. So they're Buddhists in Taiwan. And basically, they are all sort of trained or educated to, I'm going to read this, to quit smoking and drinking alcohol before becoming certified as Shuji volunteers. And vegetarianism is encouraged in this population as a means to promote planetary health and animal welfare. So what this study looked at was it followed this population of people and looked at those who were vegetarian and those who weren't, and then just simply compared their risk of stroke. It's basically, crunching the data. You look for where there's a difference and you go back and you try and crunch the data. Well, I find this so interesting because everybody in this trial, they all came from sort of the same background. They were all trained to be vegetarians to promote planetary health and animal welfare. So what does that tell you about the people who weren't vegetarians? To me, I automatically wonder, well, I guess they're the type of people who don't care about planetary health or don't care about animal welfare. Now, I would argue whether that's even true that vegetarianism impacts that, but I think it probably doesn't. But these people, either they had an awakening on their own or they simply ignored the message and didn't care. So if that's the case, right away, you have two separate, very separate groups. They're not a homogeneous group at all, even though they sort of started from the same maybe genetic makeup, the same regional makeup, but they're two very different groups. And when you look through the data, you can see in their baseline characteristics. So the non-vegetarians are much more likely to be men compared to the vegetarians, more likely to be women. The non-vegetarians in this study were likely to be older, the vegetarians younger, and the non-vegetarians were most likely to be smokers and drinkers, things that you weren't supposed to do if you were being trained and following in your upbringing and your raising, right? So clearly they're very different. They also have high blood pressure, elevated fasting glucose, and overweight compared to the vegetarians. So to look through this study and say, okay, well, there's a difference. So clearly it's because one group was vegetarian and one group wasn't. So inaccurate. You cannot make that claim based on this study. And that's why it's such a great example of highlighting the failings and of nutritional epidemiology and how these claims are not backed by the science. And it gets even better, right? So 60% of their calories were from carbohydrates in both groups. So it also doesn't apply to low carb omnivores, not at all. And they can claim a 74% relative risk reduction in strokes, but that equates to a 0.5% absolute risk reduction over 9 years. 74% reduction versus a 0.5%. So it's such a great lesson. I hope every college and postgraduate and medical school can use this specific article as an example of how data can be twisted and how poor quality data can be promoted to represent something it doesn't represent. And then let's put it in the context of what other data shows. So there's a prior study that showed vegetarians have a higher risk of hemorrhagic stroke. There's a large meta-analysis showing that higher saturated fat intake is associated with lower stroke risk. Now, again, none of these can prove one way or the other because they're all observational studies. But when you have a meta-analysis of observational studies showing that saturated fat, which usually is not going to come from vegetarian sources, is going to come from omnivore animal sources, when higher intake of that is associated with a lower risk of stroke, makes it pretty unlikely that animal animal sources of fat are causative in strokes, which is sort of what this other study is implying. So anyway, I could go on and rant and rant. You've probably heard me many times say similar things, but this is just such a prime example. So read our analysis on dietdoctor.com. Make sure you understand that the headlines don't represent the quality of the science. And that's part of my job and our job at Diet Doctor is to help you understand the importance of the quality of the science. All right. Thanks a lot. Please click subscribe to our YouTube channel so you'll get all our video updates and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye, everybody.